Without further ado, I'd like to formally introduce our presenter today, Dr. Mike Levin. Dr. Levin is a professor in the Department of Psychology at Utah State University. He is also a licensed psychologist in the state of Utah. He is the co-director for the ACT research group at USU. Dr. Levin earned his Ph.D. in clinical psychology at the University of Nevada, Reno in 2013. He's been a faculty member at USU for more than a decade now. Dr. Levin's work focuses on developing, evaluating, and disseminating self-guided digital mental health resources based on acceptance and commitment therapy. In his research career, Dr. Levin has conducted more than 40 clinical trials, evaluating digital programs for a wide range of problem areas. He has published more than 150 peer-reviewed articles and 5 books. And I will just stop to comment that that is an extraordinary number at this stage of his career. I am truly in awe. We are very fortunate to have Dr. Levin at Utah State and are very excited for all of us to learn from him today. Dr. Levin?
Great, well thank you all for coming. I'm really excited to be talking about the work that we do and how we can take acceptance commitment therapy, or ACT, into a variety of different contexts and formats to help improve the mental health and well-being of our communities. So this is a picture of my lab that I co-direct with Dr. Michael Tuig. We're both professors in Department of Psychology, and everybody else in here is one of our graduate students. So we have a clinical counseling psychology Ph.D. program, and so we're able to bring students from all around the country, around the world, to come and study with us, and it's a really cool part of the work that we do through the funding that we're able to obtain, that we can have this type of a training program. And so we'll train people in how to do cutting-edge evidence-based therapies that then they'll learn how to train other people in, that they'll be able to provide services out in our communities for. They also learn how to do research, and a lot of the research I'm presenting today is led by these students. So it's a really special part of my job that I get to work with these young professionals as they continue out, and we have this exponential impact as they work in academic medical centers, in departments of psychology, they work in community mental health, they train other providers, and we just continue to have this impact on people's mental health. So for what I want to communicate today, first I want to introduce you all to acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT, and the set of skills of helping people learn how to be more open to their inner world, to their thoughts and feelings, noticing them for what they are, how to be more mindfully aware of the present moment, and engage in doing the things that really matter to them, and how we've applied this to a wide range of different mental health and well-being concerns that are relevant to our communities. We'll talk about how we can take these skills that we know work in therapy and deliver them in self-guided formats like books, apps, and websites. And I'll mention some available resources, including our ACT Guide service suite that we have available for a low cost through the Sorensen Center for Clinical Excellence, so people can get access to the programs that we study and then are able to disseminate. And I'll mention some other examples of resources. I'm a big fan of just getting more resources out there, so if people are curious about other apps and books, I'm always excited to chat about those things. So first, let's talk a little bit about what ACT is. I like to kind of think of it this way, that part of living life, we experience challenging emotions, challenging thoughts, but where people get really stuck is in this type of inflexible patterns, particularly when we focus on trying to avoid and get away from what we think and feel. And this might be isolating from other people, like in depression, avoiding situations that bring up anxiety, numbing with substances. Really across so many different challenges that we experience in our communities is linked to this idea of avoidant and flexible responding to our inner world. And ACT seeks to address this with whatever form of suffering people are struggling with by teaching people how to open up to these experiences rather than avoid them, how to be more mindfully aware of what's available in the present moment, and how to engage in meaningful activities so that we're able to build out a rich, full, meaningful life. And if you notice, I kind of left stress, anxiety, all those things on there because that's kind of comes with the territory, unfortunately, with living a meaningful life. We can reduce some of the suffering, but like right now, I'm noticing anxiety show up because this is really important to me, and I'm excited to talk to you about this work. And so when there's things that are at stake, when there's things that really matter to us, these emotions are going to show up. And what we want to do is empower people to learn how to be open, aware, and engaged so that they can do the things that matter to them, even when challenging thoughts and feelings are present. ACT originally developed by the primary developer Steve Hayes in the 70s, and the first randomized controlled trials, which is our gold standard way of testing therapies, were done in the 80s. Around 2006, I started graduate school working with Steve Hayes, and that was about the time we were seeing this really rapid growth in ACT research. So over the past 2 decades, there's been a growth of over 1,200 randomized controlled trials conducted across a wide range of concerns, everything from psychosis to chronic pain to weight management, to depression and anxiety disorders, and so on. This has been studied around the world. Major organizations like WHO, American Psychological Association, NICE, the VAs have adopted this treatment. And our research group is a major hub for continuing to study and train people in ACT. So Mike and I co-direct with 8 graduate students. We range from about 8 to 10 at a time. We've graduated 15 previous doctoral students, 5 of whom have gone on to academic positions. We've done over 70 clinical trials, over 400 publications between Mike and I. And we also do training and service. Mike Tuig is a leading trainer in ACT. He does trainings around the state and around the world. And we have a fall workshop that we do at the Sorensen Center for Clinical Excellence, introducing professionals to ACT. And then we bring out a leading expert to come and train people in the spring on ACT more. We also have our ACT Guide Self-Help Suite, which I'll be talking a lot about the self-help programs that we make available through the SCCE website. And then people can come to the Sorensen Center to get clinical services from our graduate students who are supervised by Mike Tuig under his license. And we're really the leading lab now for ACT research. So there's been a few bibliometric studies, so looking at like patterns of publications, and Mike and I are the first and third most productive and influential ACT researchers, and USU is listed as kind of the most influential institution for ACT research. So the work that I do is especially focused on self-help interventions. And so I've done over 40 clinical trials now, looking at can we take these skills we know work in therapy and deliver them in things like books, apps, and websites. And we've tested that in everything from depression and anxiety disorders, obsessive compulsive related disorders, coping with chronic health conditions, different health promotion targets like diet, nutrition, physical activity, medication adherence, supporting caregivers. There's so many different places where people can get stuck in inflexible avoidant responses to their inner world, and where these open, aware, and engaged skills can help people to work on their behavioral goals and to live a more rich, full life. And I think the self-help formats is really important when we consider the challenges of accessing mental health services. When I started graduate school, I was so excited about how we can use research to help refine and optimize treatments. We can get better resources out to people. But then I was quickly discouraged by just how many barriers also show up. When we think about the number of people who would benefit from psychological services, there's so many more than our available providers, especially when we get out of city centers and we look at rural settings and we think about specialty services. On the consumer side, there's a number of practical barriers that show up, and psychological barriers, like people have this kind of wax and wane of motivation, and what they're kind of deciding if they need treatment, and there's these barriers of cost, time, and travel that seem to get in the way. And so I think we need to expand out our portfolio of options. I'll have a video now of my close collaborator, Ty Aller, at the Institute for Disability Research Policy and Practice. We've done a lot of work in developing digital ACT programs, and we just got a grant from USU to further look at evaluating one of our interventions in rural Utah. So I'll have the video now talk a little bit more about how we could see these digital ACT programs being useful.
Overall, I would say I'm most interested in improving the quality of life and well-being of folks living in rural communities, and improving access to care is just one of those steps that we need to take. Digital mental health interventions like ACT Guides, one of those ways that we can improve access to care. As a rural resident myself that was born and raised in an agricultural family, accessing mental health services was often stigmatized or really, frankly, impossible to get access to. These programs can help us improve access to communities that may most need them. I think that digital mental health interventions like ACT Guide are really unique in that they can reach people exactly where they're at, in the privacy of their home, and provide high-quality mental health services that can improve well-being and quality of life. These programs are co-developed, they meet the outcomes that matter most to the groups we're working with, and most importantly, we work with these groups to make sure they're sustainable after the research ends.
Great. So I'm really excited about the promise that I think these ACT self-help programs can have in improving mental health. I'm going to talk about some specific examples, and we're going to purposefully kind of jump around to some different areas because I want to show the breadth of ways that this can support mental health and well-being in our communities. We'll start with college mental health, where I first started to do this work. We'll have a video with Mike Tuig and Lila Capel talking about our work with obsessive-compulsive related disorders. And then we'll talk about chronic health conditions and health behavior change. So I'll try to cram a lot in, but I want to really show some of these different areas we do this. We know that with college students, this is a time where mental health problems can tend to develop. There's a number of transitions for people, challenges, and stressors. And so back in 2006, when I was starting graduate school, Steve Hayes and Jackie Pizzarello got a large grant to develop a classroom-based ACT program to help improve mental health for college students. And then we got together where I was also a PI on some grants looking at developing digital versions, so like digital self-help interventions. Before I start talking about self-help programs we built, I want to mention a study where we tested an existing book at the library, actually. So my past graduate student, Jennifer Kraft, who's now an assistant professor at Lemoyne College, looked at testing 2 books that were just readily available at the library. A student could go log in and get access to these online evidence-based books. And so we randomized 102 college students with social anxiety to get either an ACT book or a cognitive behavioral book focused more on trying to challenge and change unhelpful thoughts. And we found that over an 8-week period when people used the books, they had a substantial decrease in their social anxiety symptoms, about halving the symptom count on average. We didn't have a control arm, but we saw just really large reductions in anxiety symptoms. And this is simply orienting people to books that were readily available for them to access for free. And so we'll talk about different digital interventions, but if you ever find yourself getting overwhelmed with options or not sure what to use, just keep in mind there's really good evidence-based books that we can refer people to and can be of quite a lot of benefit for people. So these are a few examples of our ACT Guide program that we've developed. And what I like about the digital interventions we create is that we heavily focus on making these programs interactive and personalized. We really want people to apply the skills they're learning in their life, and we found ways to use the exercises to do that. So for example, having someone reflect on where are you spending your time throughout the day? What are you valuing in terms of what you're doing? And then looking at that, like, okay, I'm spending 40% of my time working. Does that fit my values? What's that say about my values? And are there changes I want to make? And where the rubber meets the road is then often having people set a goal to look at, okay, what's something you want to do this week to kind of change up where you're spending your time in line with your values? We might have people do like a card sort where they're looking at what value is most important to me personally. Because this is really between you and you, like what do you value? What do you hold as important? And then picking some actions that you could do in line with that value, and then probably again rolling that into a goal setting exercise. Just to show kind of a different target, we might have people identify a thought like nobody likes me, and then go through a set of exercises to build some flexibility. Can we just first notice that as a thought? Like I'm having the thought that nobody likes me. Starting to create a little distance from it. Maybe we use a metaphor like, okay, if your mind was like this bully, almost like if you could picture it, what's this bully telling you to do? Maybe it's to pull away from other people because you think nobody likes me. And then to pause and think like, who's in charge, me or this mind bully that I've sort of created? And these are just little strategies, but they compile together into helping people get more flexible in how to respond to their thoughts, so they have more room in choosing how they want to respond. And they might then pick some to practice. One of the core trials that led into the development of our publicly available program was a randomized dismantling trial where we randomized 181 distressed college students to get either just the open skills in an ACT program, just the engaged skills, or a combination. And we found that all 3 improved mental health symptoms relative to no intervention. And then we looked at reliable change rates, which is what is the proportion of those samples in each condition that showed meaningful changes in their mental health. Like we saw a large enough change to say, okay, they really improved. We saw that people who got the engaged skills alone or in combination with open improved more. And so we really think that, especially in college mental health, focusing on those values-based behavior change efforts are particularly important. I like this quote that came from the trial and giving a sense of what we're in part trying to do. Most teenagers and college students are too afraid to ask for help for fear of judgment and will not go to see someone. This website allows them to get help without the fear of judgment. And the way I approach thinking about self-help, sometimes there's a worry like, is this about trying to like disrupt and replace therapy? And definitely not. I'm a licensed psychologist. I'm a big proponent of therapy. But the idea more is, can we just increase access to more resources for our community? And there's a lot of different ways that I see self-help resources fitting in. One of them is that there's a subset of people who, for whatever reason, aren't seeking help, but would really benefit from learning things like these open, aware, and engaged skills. And this can be a step in for them to learn them. We found in some trials that then increases people's motivation to then seek therapy. And in other cases, people find they get what they need too. So based on this trial, we made a publicly available ACT Guide program that we launched to the public in 2019. And with generous funding support from President Cockett, we had that available to USU students for free for about a 2.5-year period. So my graduate student, Carter Davis, who's now a postdoctoral fellow at Stanford University and VA Palo Alto, did a study where he wanted to look at how did we do in those dissemination efforts. And we ended up getting about 1,600 students enrolled, was reaching about 6% of our student body. And when we looked at what other types of services people were seeking, we found this interesting thing where about 1/3 of that sample had never sought treatment before for mental health concern. And about half of those individuals reported that they'd struggled with the mental health concern for years. So part of this is we can increase access to a new segment of people. And Carter's dissertation, interestingly, was a study looking at depressed people who were receiving antidepressants but not therapy. And when we did a digital ACT self-help program, we were able to increase their motivation to seek therapy. So part of this too is this can be an early step for some people. We can use these resources adjunctively with treatment. We can use this to address gaps in care, like people on a wait list to start therapy or after termination. And there's another version of this talk where we could just be talking about all the different ways we have tested integrations of self-help with other care. If you do use these digital interventions in communities, it's worth always thinking about adherence. We know in general this is a challenge for mental health services, and you certainly see this show up with self-help resources. I find it really varies on the use case, but in some cases you might need additional supports to help people stick to these programs. So my graduate student Corey Klimstack did an innovative study where we had other USU students provide what we called peer coaching to help support fellow students in using the digital ACT program. And so in a randomized trial with 230 students, we found that when people got ACT Guide Plus coaching, they improved more on their depression, anxiety, and stress symptoms than if they got ACT Guide alone. And so we did this serial mediation test, basically looking at what accounted for that change. Why did people improve? And we saw, consistent with expectations, that getting coaching led to completing more of the program. And completing more of the program led to greater improvements in these psychological flexibility skills, or basically open, aware, and engaged strategies. Coaching itself also seemed to improve those outcomes. And lastly, it was those improvements in getting open, aware, and engaged that led to improvements in mental health. And so basically what our mediation analyses found was that the reason coaching was helpful is it helped people get more out of the program and learn more of these open, aware, and engaged skills. So we've done a lot of work in college mental health, but we've also done a number of studies in different targeted mental health concerns. And so we'll switch now to talk a bit about our work in obsessive compulsive related disorders. And with generous donation funding that we've received from the Huntsman Foundation and from Michael Batt, we've been able to continue to develop and expand out digital ACT programs for this work. And I'm gonna actually switch to another video because my collaborator Mike Tuig is a real leading expert in doing ACT for OCRDs. And he'll speak to that work, particularly in trichotillomania, which is a compulsive hair pulling pattern that people sometimes get stuck in.
I really like researching OCD and trichotillomania, probably for the main reason being the people that I work with really want to get better, but they're stuck. If one of our goals is to help everyone who needs help with trichotillomania, we can only see so many people in person. So the next move was to do an online platform where, sort of an unlimited number of individuals could use it. Right now, there are way more clients than there are therapists. And then when you get to these specialty problems, it's even a bigger problem where there's only so many people who know how to treat OCD and trichotillomania and skin picking. For some people, like a bibliotherapy or a web-based therapy can be what they need to get them through that moment. But for some people, it's kind of their launching point that would get them into the next thing. So for example, we just finished a study where we put people through ACT Guide for Trick.
I tested both sort of how effective and how feasible a treatment like this would be for this population. So this online treatment for trichotillomania. trichotillomania. To test it, we ran a randomized controlled trial, which has people receiving the intervention, and then half of our participants don't receive the intervention until the full study is done.
We had them do 6 in-person therapy sessions, and they got additionally better.
The people that are talking to me through this program understand what I'm going through and empathetic to my experience.
Everyone said, we really liked hearing it online and then hearing it from you, because you kind of said it different ways, and the combination really helped us understand this intervention.
Globally, there's a lot of stigma around hair pulling and sort of it being a bad habit. I think as a lab, we don't believe that that's the case, and I think that people hear that and feel that in the program.
Mike Levin developed ACT Guide, and he's done general ones, and then we moved on to these ones for these particular problems that we're interested in, so like trichotillomania and skin picking, and we have one for OCD almost finished. You know, once we have those built, then we just have to do sort of a system of advertising, and then once we have those out there, people start using them, clinicians start telling their clients about them, they see the success, they start telling more clients, and some of these communities are kind of tight. So then people start telling each other. So my understanding is quite a number of people are signing up for them.
Great. I'm going to keep trying to cram in some different examples, but I think this hopefully gives a sense of how these open, aware, and engaged skills can apply to different mental health conditions. But I want to pivot now to talk a bit about chronic health conditions. There's a large body of literature showing that ACT can be effective in supporting people in how to adhere to behavior change required for some chronic health conditions, or how to improve quality of life for people with different conditions. And ACT, I think, applies particularly well here. For example, we know that people can get stuck in avoidant, inflexible patterns with their physical symptoms from chronic health conditions. And if we can instead teach people how to be open and aware of those experiences, not to approve them and like them, but just because they are there, it allows people to get a little bit less suffering and more openness to be able to do something different. And one way I think of this is it's like practicing self-compassion, to make space for what's there. And this is particularly important in chronic health conditions where we know that people regularly experience quite a bit of invalidation and stigma. The other part I really like in ACT that applies here particularly well is this idea that when we talk about values and we help people set goals, we try to get away from this more kind of rigid outcome-focused goal approach, like I need to be able to do this, I need to reach this, and a little bit more focused on this quality, this way of being. Like how do you bring meaning into this moment? So it's like more about how you do the things that you do. And I think this applies particularly well for chronic health conditions where people might be faced with very real challenges in terms of what they're able to do, what is feasible and realistic, and with that we can look at values to be more about, okay, but what do you want, how can you bring about your values today? Like how could you be more compassionate, more curious today? How could you bring the sense of adventure to today? So I think that fits particularly well. My graduate student Marissa Donahue has led work where we've developed a prototype version of an ACT Guide program designed to help support quality of life and well-being for people with chronic health conditions. So we ran a pilot trial with 38 adults with a wide range of different conditions. We ended up recruiting them in about 5 weeks, so there was a lot of interest, it seemed, from the community. And this was just an open trial, but we saw significant large improvements in people's health-related quality of life over time, including more physical components like role functioning, as well as psychological components like satisfaction with life. Following up on that, Ty Aller was able to secure funding for us to develop a 6-session full ACT Guide for chronic health program that we actually just launched a few weeks ago, so it's available now on our website. And with this program, we were again aiming at teaching people how to learn these open, aware, and engaged skills to address the variety of different barriers that show up with a range of different chronic health conditions. We ran a randomized controlled trial with 100 adults. We ended up having 61 different chronic health conditions represented in that sample. And that speaks to a part of why I really like this ACT approach, is that we're targeting these common core skills and this shared challenge of inflexible, avoidant responding to inner experiences that can be relevant to a wide range of different conditions. So rather than trying to roll out a program for MS, a program for pain, we're more like, can we target these common core skills using this heavily personalized intervention? And so in a randomized trial, we found just against a waitlist condition, but we saw significant improvements in people's well-being, as well as in their self-reported impairment from their chronic health condition. We also saw they improved in their open, aware, and engaged skills, and that those improvements seemed to account for why people improved on well-being. Okay, I'm going to fit one more in because I also want to talk about health behavior change. We have a strong literature in ACT applied to a variety of different behavior change targets. And I think one that's particularly relevant is health behaviors. I was trying to brush my 10-month-old teeth this morning, so I was appreciating health behavior change is really hard. But in all seriousness, it's extremely hard, and it's really hard to maintain. And what I like about ACT is we sometimes will come at problems from a bit of a different angle from our dominant culture. And I think this really applies here, where we just know in our culture there is such a heavy stigmatization of weight, and that we often will then internalize those weight stigmatizing messages. And this can lead to very unhelpful approaches to things like physical activity and diet, where really the energy is around trying to avoid and escape the stigmatized identity, how bad it is to be overweight. And it's certainly a marathon, not a sprint, but the pull is to just try to do these big changes that can be harmful for people in the moment, or that can do things like yo-yo dieting, where we make changes but then lose those changes, which create more physiological problems for long-term health changes. And so this is a real problematic pattern that we see, and ACT comes in with this different stance, where we start at this point of, okay, but what do you want to be about in whatever you're doing, including your diet and your physical activity? Why do you want to make these changes, and how is it important to you in terms of the life you're building, as opposed to just trying to get away from what you don't want, get away from that stigmatizing identity? And so we help people to connect with more intrinsic motivators. They're going to help build sustainable patterns over time for why people are making changes in their life. My graduate student, Sarah Potts, who's now a behavioral health director at a health center, conducted for her dissertation a study where we used this book called The Diet Trap. It's a really nice self-help book written by my close collaborator, Jason Lillis, that uses ACT to target these weight self-stigmatizing messages and help people build up more intrinsic motivators for making long-term health behavior changes. And so we randomized 55 adults from the community with overweight and who reported high self-stigma to use the book or not. And we also included a phone coaching component. So we found that whether or not people got phone coaching, we got these large improvements in weight self-stigma. The study was a little bit too underpowered to test the additive effect of phone coaching, but we did find that phone coaching seemed to have a signal for leading to better improvements in physical activity and diet. As a sidebar comment, I've mentioned phone coaching a few times. That's one pathway to help increase adherence and to supplement these interventions. It really depends on the context. Like in our trichotillomania research, we get very high engagement in our programs, and the coaching didn't really have an additive benefit when we've tested it. So it just depends on the use case. But I always recommend, if you're looking at using these self-help resources, for example, like in a system of care, just to be mindful that you might need to think about strategies for adherence. In a follow-up study, we created a digital program working with USU Extension, and a nutrition professor, Carrie Durward, created a dietary education component really focused on a more additive approach. How do we bring more healthy foods into your diet and take a more positively motivated approach to building out healthy eating? And we used ACT to target these weight stigmatizing components, as well as use open and aware skills just to do all the hard things that it takes to make a health behavior change. We ended up recruiting 79 adults with overweight across the state of Utah, including in rural settings, in about a month. So it was a pretty fast recruitment, actually much faster than we expected. And we found that when people got that intervention, they improved on their weight self-stigma relative to not getting an intervention. And then they also improved in their dietary recall assessment. Basically, their healthy eating improved over time using a rigorous dietary recall method. We also saw we reduced maladaptive eating patterns, we improved people's well-being, and we improved these open and aware skills. So it's kind of broadly helpful for our Utah communities. So that was a lot of different examples, and that was kind of my goal and strategy. I wanted to show that these open, aware, and engaged skills from ACT can be used to address a lot of different needs that we might have in our communities and in our rural communities. Although I'm focused on ACT here, I'm a big proponent of mental health resources in general. And I think similarly, there's a lot of mental health resources we can get out to people to help improve the lives of our communities. And in terms of resources we provide, very importantly, we need to continue to increase access to therapy services. Self-help's an additional component that I think is important to have in the portfolio of options that we offer people. That might be offered to people who aren't getting services otherwise. It could be an early step for treatment. It could be an adjunctive resource before or after therapy. There's a lot of ways we can fit it in. Our Act Guide Service Suite, which is one program that we offer to the community, is one method. There's self-help books, there's a variety of evidence-based apps and other websites. And just the broader message really is we can give more resources to our communities, including through these self-help formats. So I'll go ahead and stop there and open it up to questions. Thank you all.
So yes, this is an interactive session. I encourage people to raise their hands with questions, and so let's get started.
So is Act Guide available right now to the public?
Yes, it is. Let me see if... Is this working too? Okay, perfect. Yes, it is available to the public. So we do charge a small fee, it's about $25, and that goes just to the ongoing maintenance and support of the program. But if you go to the middle QR code there, and I think the handout has it too, you'll see we have a whole suite of different services. So we have a standard Act Guide. It's 12 sessions, which I'll be honest is a little long, but it's because we had all these sessions. We're like, let's just give everything. So it's kind of a longer program. And then we also have a single session version of our program, more of like a crash course, like if people just want to do one session learning these skills. We found some signals that's helpful too. We have an adolescent version, kind of a preliminary version of that program available. And then some of these targeted obsessive compulsive related disorder programs we've done trials on, so hoarding, trichotillomania, skin picking, and then we just launched the chronic health condition one.
So those are specified. If people want something specific like that, then they would find that if they went to your programs.
Yes, that's right. And so we have a landing page, and the kind of set of them are right there. You can click, and it's kind of text heavy, but if you click on one, you can like read about the programs, and then there's you can sign up right on the website.
That's great.
Are there any more programs that are in development that are going to be on the website, or is that what you're sticking to right now?
That's a great question. There is a surprisingly large amount of programs we have at different stages. So the latest ones on the queue are a program for caregivers of individuals with dementia. We have a single session intervention that we just got nice results for people who've been recently diagnosed with dementia. And this is working with the ADRC at USU. We also have a program for autistic adults, both a 6-session and a single session. We just completed trials and we're going to work on launching those. That's with Ty Aller. We have a version for undocumented individuals and working on a Spanish version too that we're hoping to make those available to the public. And there's a couple others. We just got a grant for misophonia, making an Act Guide program. And I'm probably forgetting a few others, but it's a pretty big spread. So we're hoping to continue to scale these up over time.
Thank you.
Hi, Clark Riplinger, USU CAPS.
Excellent.
So I imagine that there's a lot that goes into the development of this, like how to decide what to include, how to make it specifically tailored. And I'm curious about that, but the part that has me the most interested is the user experience.
Mm-hmm.
I imagine you get a lot of people that probably start and don't finish or don't keep up with it. And I liked the research with the peer coaches, and that seemed interesting. But how do you decide how to make this experience to be more user-friendly? How are you deciding to help encourage people to keep going with it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'd say that's probably where the majority of my work is these days, especially because we know this broadly in the digital mental health literature, that we get more positive signals for engagement and adherence when everyone's like you're enrolled in a trial, you meet the researchers, you're doing these assessments, you're just getting this highly motivated sample. And then when we just deliver it more broadly, we see adherence is much lower. So that's something I always like to warn people of. And the way I approach it is this isn't for everyone. So this was part of an option to deliver, but not everyone's going to use it and benefit. Now that said, there's a segment that really benefit from it. So part of it is I've been looking at how do we match people to the right resource. Some people I think will do much better with a single session. They're not going to do a 6-session. So how do we kind of get the right people to a single session so they still get some resources? The coaching component and figuring out, again, importantly, who benefits from coaching or not. We're working on a large PCORI grant application to kind of help tease some of this apart for autistic adults, for example. it's very important to get user data on their experiences using the programs. And the type of approach we use for development is set up really well to be able to rapidly be able to modify our programs based on data that we get back. In some areas like autistic adults, we've done a heavy co-development approach too. So people with lived experience are informing as we're building the programs. So it's a very multifaceted problem with multifaceted solutions. Those are some examples of ways we've tackled it. And I'll just briefly mention, I forgot to say, we also have an ACT guide for OCD that we're finishing completion for with donation support from Michael Batts. So that also is another program we're going to have out soon.
Hi, I work at a local high school, and walking around the halls, we have a diverse community there. Some kids are really college bound and very well motivated. And some kids, well, they don't even show up at the building. They take the bus to school, they leave for 6 hours and come back and take the bus home. I'm wondering out loud, if you have if this is applied to 9th to 12th graders, and if you try to get into a high school around Logan someplace, have you tried to get high school kids to use this program? That's what my question, I guess.
Yes, that's a great question. I've done a little bit in working with the adolescent community. So most of our programs have been more adult focused. When we did an adolescent version of ACT Guide, we got a little bit stuck in terms of it was hard to enroll people. It's a bit challenging, and also importantly to protect human subjects and protect parents and kids. The parental consent process, I think, also just made it a little challenging, but of course that's important. So we haven't done much testing with adolescents because of that. That said, Mike Tuig has done a lot of work with adolescent populations using ACT with therapy, and we've done some trials like a school-based group program for depression, anxiety. One of our past grad students, Julie Peterson, did that for her dissertation, looking at health anxiety, for example. And so we found ACT to be useful in those populations. There's a little bit of research. There's a group in the UK that's done that in a bit of a more integrated, like bringing it into the school system, and I think also with a bit of an academic success component, because as you were mentioning, that kind of how to engage students in the school. I think that's a place where values could be useful in helping people connect with, like, well, what do you want to have happen here? Like, what are you hoping to do? And how can you kind of bring some of that and motivate yourself to engage more in school? So I know they've done some work in that space.
My name is Norm Zern. I do a lot of work at the prison. I've done it for off and on for 40 years. One of the things that's evolved a lot with the new prison, there's a lot of technology available that never was in the past. And I'm also a professor out there. One of the things they have now, which they've never had until the last year or two, most inmates have access to tablets, not computers, they can't go out, but tablets. And I'm pleasantly surprised how many really do access these tablets. It seems to me, as I see all the different concerns, imagine being in a prison, and I've been in there 3 times last week, I go there all the time, of so many of these issues are issues that really could be dealt with, and many of them would actively like to know. I'd love to see somehow or another you or somebody, and I like what Jim had to say. I think that there's some things in our community. We got to remember 95% of these people are going to get out. I want you to know that, and I know so many of them. So anyway, I'd love to see some access of some of the issues you have somewhere or another tied into tablets without a great cost. And I, of course, would know who we could deal with and all that. But I think it's awesome what you're doing.
Oh, well, thank you. And that's such a great point and example of a place that we could just, let's get more resources there. And I remember the first self-help book written on ACT, my understanding was it was originally intended for use in a prison. And so using self-help resources as a resource. There was something else I was going to say with that. But I mentioned the book part because although there's different types of technology, I always like to bring us back to like, there's nothing magic in any one given technology as opposed to just helping people learn how to walk through and apply these skills in their life. And so I think there's a lot of nice models and ways to figure out how do we navigate the barriers that are there to still give people more resources. And the programs we create, if there's online access, they're actually pretty scalable across devices, but it just depends on the use case. But I think the bigger message is just there are self-help resources and there's different ways to problem solve that.
I have two questions. The first is, how do you keep online what your upcoming studies are so we can refer people to sign up? And then the second is, are you studying all the transferring of skills, meaning you are training, like parents go through an act, teachers do, even in business. I think so often with mental health, we see it as you have to be sick, when in reality our society hasn't taught us basic skills to just be resilient and self-care, and I think ACT has a huge component to that. So I'm wondering if even businesses, executives, corporations being interested in using this as a management tool to simply, yes, increase productivity, but increase their positive environment.
Yeah, those are excellent questions. We do have on our website, utahact.com, which will be that first URL. We have a section for studies we're currently recruiting for. We've been fortunate to have pretty rapid enrollment lately, so we haven't had studies open enrollment for a long time, and so there's often like 1 or 2 studies listed there, but that's a place that we'll always list if we have open enrollment for a study. With regards to these benefits in other communities, I focus on health behavior change, but ACT has been applied to athletic performance with good results. And actually in business settings, there's been a really nice set of studies. Frank Bond in the UK kind of led this work showing improvements in worker productivity. And then, of course, very importantly, also like burnout, people's well-being. And so we can apply these skills in other settings to help improve both kind of like bottom line outcomes and behaviors as well as people's well-being.
At the end of April, there was Salt Lake Tribune series about federal funds being cut for reaching out for mental health in rural communities, particularly farmers. And do you see, or are you approached by, like, can we encourage or send people to your services that they can start to build out linkages, say if state level funding becomes generated, that can reach these rural populations and high need for suicide prevention, all the pressures, that kind of things that are faced by entire industries and communities?
Yes, that's a great question. So working with Ty Aller, he does a lot of work and focus on rural communities. And we just got a seed grant from USU focused on just that, where we're taking our single session program and looking at, is it effective in the rural communities? And really importantly, how do we improve dissemination implementation? Like how do we learn from the communities to figure out better how to give resources that are useful to them? So we're doing some work in that space. I'll note that we've lost some funding that was also supporting that kind of work. And so we've been impacted by that and looking for other ways that, again, we could just come back to our values and our activity, which is how do we get these resources out to people?
I wondered if our Regents guests had any questions.
I'd love to ask one, and
oh, yeah.
I think we were somewhat getting to it, but I know you mentioned there was limited data around some of the adolescent utilization, but as a father of 2 teenagers and a third that thinks she's a teenager, were there any call them mental health stressors that showed up in that data that would be credible, that someone like myself, a parent, should be proactively thinking about?
Like in terms of the sources of mental health challenges?
Yeah, so in your presentation you talked about some of the main college mental health stressor was social anxiety, the symptoms that occurred with that. I was just curious, in your adolescent studies, even though you mentioned there was some limited data, were there some stressors or symptoms that showed up even in that limited capacity?
Yeah, that's a great question. The work that we've done with adolescents, we do see this similar pattern of inflexible avoidant responding to Anxiety is a really common one that we see, and that's where we've often focused. We see depression too, and obviously a multitude of other concerns, but it's that inflexible responding that seems to be contributing to a lot of problems. And when I call it psychological inflexibility, the way I think of it is like my actions are based on trying to avoid and not have my inner experiences, or otherwise based on just like what my mind is telling me, what my emotions are telling me, at the expense of doing what would be meaningful or effective in the moment. So like Mike Tuig is a line of work at an adolescent eating disorder facility where they've similarly replicated those processes seem to play a key role in what contributes to eating disorders. And I think that there's a number of environmental factors and developmental factors that affect teenagers that are going to lead to all those inner experiences, those challenging thoughts and feelings. And although I think we need to do a lot to help support our teens to, navigating that world, I think like that's just going to show up. And so how do we help people break out of those unhelpful avoidant patterns, I think is particularly key.
This is the greatest presentation ever. Thank you so very much. Are there ways that, how can other people get involved in helping with either collaborate, scale, identify problems that are making it difficult to scale and get more access to more people? How can we help? And or find other ways to partner with other organizations that are doing similar work, or find other applications, et cetera, et cetera.
Oh, well, that's very kind of you, and I'm really excited to be giving this talk and to be speaking with you all, because that's really where my values align. Is I want to just get this stuff out there more. We've created a system for us to be able to develop and research these programs, but end of the day, it's about getting these resources out to people. And more my research is pivoting to that later part of understanding, okay, how do we actually get this out? How do we actually get this into people's hands? How do we support people to engage in them? So I regularly collaborate with people in the community, people working in systems, in all sorts of different contexts. And so if people are interested in this work, I'm always excited to sit down and have a conversation and talk through that, either in terms of ways we can collaborate, or just in other ways I can support people in increasing access to resources, because it might even just be like, I'm like, oh, there's a book here and I really recommend it, but I really want to help kind of get these resources out there.
Okay, that's like, how do we be in touch with you, or how do we initiate such a thing?
Oh, yes. So I think my email is listed on the pamphlet. I'm weirdly the best at email. Like if people call me, it's less good. It's like I'm actually slower to answer a call or a text message than my email. So my wife's in the audience and she will email me when something's happening. Maybe that says a little bit about how much I'm working, but that's a good way to contact me. It's mike.levin@usu.edu or michael.levin, either one.
It is in the brochure.
Oh, perfect.
Just based on the work you've done and the research you've done, I'm just curious about your personal opinions about books that are self-help books. Are there books, do you have something like a list or something that you recommend in terms of books that you think are generally good for self-help in general for people for different reasons, issues in their lives, or?
Yeah, great question. So in the past, I used to really push and update some of these lists, and I ran into this problem where that landscape was just changing so quick, especially in apps, because it was like maybe 10 years ago, mental health apps were getting more popular. I'm like, how do we get this out more? And it was just changing day to day. Or an app I liked all of a sudden changed and became commercialized in a weird way that I don't know if I still felt like was a good fit. There's a couple resources I always recommend. One is Association for Behavioral and Cognitive Therapies. It's called ABCT. So if you remember ABC and then T, Self-Help Books of Merit. That's a really excellent resource. This is from psychologists who've well-vetted evidence-based books. And what I like about this list is that they're well-vetted. And the books focus on a number of targeted concerns, because I do think, I do a lot of work in like transdiagnostic resources, a resource that can be helpful for a lot of problems, but I do think for especially some specialty problems like addictions, having something really tailored is going to be much more helpful. And so that's a great book list that I recommend. Not every book has had a study on it, but I know they're extremely careful in making sure these are good evidence-based resources. And we know in the literature at this point, there's been so many trials in psychology broadly looking at self-help, that we know that if this includes the good evidence-based methods we studied in therapy, it should work in a self-help format reasonably. So I like that list. That's probably the main one I recommend right now.
What were those lists again?
So it's ABCT, Self-Help Books of Merit. And if you look for it and it's a little hard to find online, feel free to email me and I'll send that over. There used to be something called Cyber Guide, PSYBER guide, cyber guide that was funded by the One Mind Institute, and they would do the same thing with apps. But when I looked at it recently, I couldn't tell if they were still updating. That's one for apps. The other one I'll mention for apps actually is the VA has an excellent set of apps that are freely available. They're tailored for veterans, which is awesome, and they target a number of specific concerns, but they're also usable for the general public. And so I really recommend those apps as well.
Okay, let's all thank Dr. Levin again for an outstanding presentation.
Thank you, everybody.